Stippling is a blending technique that's fast and pretty easy to do. But let me tell you, there are some hidden benefits that can really take your blends to the next level, avoiding some of the big frustrations. So in this video, I'm gonna show you all the hidden advantages of using this technique and how these benefits make stippling the superior technique, allowing you to take your minis to the next level. The first advantage of stippling is in the tools that we use, which in this case are your brush. It's your brush. There's a wide range of brushes that you can use stippling with, each one with their unique benefits. Let's just divide them in two different categories. The first category is the ruined synthetic brush. If you stipple with this brush with strong synthetic splitted bristles, you will produce in a single tap on the surface multiple very interesting marks. You can use bigger brushes for bigger surfaces, and smaller brushes for smaller surfaces. And in this category, I would put dome dry brushes as well, because if you tap them on the surface, they produce very similar marks. The second category is the natural sable brushes. Again, here you can use different sizes for different things you have to paint, but usually for miniature painting, the max size is like a 2 or a 3 when we're talking about non-synthetic bristles. While the motion with the brush is pretty similar, the result you get is pretty different because the bristles are way softer than the synthetic bristles. So the marks that we make with this kind of brushes are more similar to irregular marks. You can paint single dots, but that requires a lot of patience. So in most cases, you're gonna produce this kind of marks that I'm showing you now on screen. This tapping motion, though, can create a lot of strain on the bristle of your brush. So even when you're working with smaller and more precise stipple, it's not very recommendable that you actually use a sharp tip brush. Keep the old detail brushes that no longer have a point to stipple, because it's actually what you need, that irregular tip to stipple properly in detail. The first advantage of this technique is that you can use different brushes. Each of these will produce different results. But now let's move on to the second advantage, which is all about the combination of the brush stroke we use and the transparency of the paint. Let me explain. You mainly have two methods to do this. Method number one, on a base coat, which is gonna be your shadow, you layer up gradually with lighter colors, tapping the surface with your brush. The key here is transparency, at least a teensy tiny bit of transparency. This can work with both ruined brushes like I'm doing on this Blood Angel, or with a detailed natural saber brush that lost its point like I'm doing for this Crimson Fist. When you make a mark with stippling, you are rarely looking for a mark that's fully opaque, and you're probably not gonna create that unless you do the very small dot that I mentioned previously. And this is not just because of the consistency of the paint. The opacity of the paint, so how much the paint covers, doesn't just depend on the amount of water you add to your paint, but on something else that I'll be mentioning in just a bit. On the Blood Angel, my brush strokes, or better, the tapping motion is pretty rough. I am violently tapping the main highlight point, then gradually moving towards the shadow area. As I move towards the shadow area, I unload a little bit the brush on my finger or on a paper towel, and then I move on to a lighter red, swapping the brush from a ruined flat brush to a ruined slightly smaller brush. From here, you have a solid starting point to build and push the contrast with a detail brush like I will be doing for my Crimson Fist. It's super important to incorporate stippling with some edge highlighting to give more definition and readability to your model, especially for artificial elements like armors and such. Using a detail brush, on the other hand, the stipples will be slightly different, more controlled, more precise. It requires a little bit of finesse coming out of your ass. I started from a base coat of really dark blue. I wanted a big jump in contrast, but at the same time I wanted to keep that
Prussian blue saturation. And for that, I use this Scale 75 Artist Range blue. I started layering my stipple with a mix of blue and light blue. I don't know. I'll put some colors in the description, I guess. It's literally identical. You just need a little bit more brush control because you need to be intentional with the marks you're making. Contrary to most beliefs, this can end up being as smooth as glazing because basically it is glazing. What? Well, if the paint is transparent, it is a glaze. Transparency is not a binary concept, it's on a continuum. Like I explained in my
foundation system, which is the first miniature painting course that actually covers the real fundamentals of painting. So you can stop struggling with consistency and blending and brush control, brush pressure, which are all so important. So support the channel, improve, and check the link in the description.
Anyway, like I was hinting at before, there's another factor that impacts on the opacity/transparency of the paint, other than the consistency. And literally no one is explaining this pretty fucking key passage of blending. So you actually saw me do this in both paint jobs. To blend the staples, I have to unload the brush as I gradually move towards the shadows. The less paint you have on the brush, the more transparent the stipple will be. And that's what we want to make everything blend by itself, basically. Also, stippling describes the motion of the brush, not the transparency or the consistency of the paint. So it's pretty easy with a detail brush to achieve something that's actually really smooth. Just look at Richard Gray's work. He pretty much uses a combination of stippling with irregular brush strokes and transparent layers.
But of course here you have a problem because where you place your stipple is kind of important.
And this can be really challenging if you're just starting out now thinking about highlight placement. So that's why I think it might be easier for you to start from the second method.
This one will allow you to map out highlight areas before you start stippling. So you kind of figure out the placement on the whole surface of the model before you start blending it. And if something doesn't add up in the placement, you can fix it without spending extra time blending and then repainting. When you think about highlight placement, try to see the geometry of the models, not in terms of just shapes, but divided into planes. So you can see which planes are facing the light and which planes are facing the shadow, and which planes are in the middle, which are going to be our middle tones. To help you with that, I have a free cheat sheet down below for highlight placement and understanding planes. So download that in the link in the description. So first you map the areas, then you stipple on the edges with the same color that you layered, because we're gonna use that transparency to blend those two layers together. Blending on the edges with stippling also has another hidden benefit. Stippling brush direction is something that we don't need to worry about. The tapping motion is like perpendicular or 45 degrees to the surface of the model, so you don't have to drag the paint that much, which is what creates chalkiness.
So the second advantage no one really talks about is having the possibility to combine transparent paint with that brush tapping motion. This is something unique to stippling that allows you to blend faster and safer with less chalkiness, and also achieve smooth blends if you work enough on it. But that's not all.
Making mistakes with stippling doesn't really feel like making mistakes are turned into the history of the surface you're painting. It becomes texture, it becomes like storytelling. It adds more value to the piece, which is so important to have on a model. As long as you follow the rule of contrast and not have the whole model stippled in, but always have a little bit of variation.
But still, what makes stippling really stand out is this final hidden advantage, which is the ability to create smooth texture.
Smooth texture? The fuck you're talking about? With the term smooth texture, I mean having every mark on the model be intentional. Stippling becomes really smooth and advanced when you're totally in control of the opacity and the kind of mark you are making.
But at the same time, from the ability of leaving some of the texture in. It's so easy to overdo the glazes to clean up the surface and totally lose the texture.
You want contrast between the smooth part of the model, cloth or silk or stuff like that, with the rougher part of the model, which could be like armor or rough skin or stuff like that.
To achieve a smooth texture look, you will need to use more opaque and intentional marks on some of the parts of the surface, or you can go crazy and layer small dots.
But I think for blending, it all boils down to what works for you, for how much you want to control your brush and your consistency. And guess what? I have here a playlist with like a lot of different blending techniques, so you can watch that and see if any of that works better for you, or if you want to just add to your tool thingy. So I'll see you there. You'll see past me there because it's a playlist. It's has been filmed for a long